Good morning, everybody. This is Spiral Dynamics Integral Live. Today, we're going to have a short presentation and a discussion led by Barbara Bound, one of our long-term members, who is a retired woman engineer, spent a lot of time working in the energy industry. And so I will, without further ado, I will turn it over to Barbara.
Some of you who are on some of the Facebook pages may have seen this diagram that was posted there recently by an artist. So a lot about the relationships between the levels and a couple of things. And I'm going to talk about, going from orange through, going from blue through orange into green, and a couple of things I wanted to show you on this that I added to his, and that is all through the so-called blue eras, there's always been a nasty red behind the throne, always. Everything from the Inquisition to the Crusades, those kinds of things. One of the things that that orange does that we don't talk about very much, except in a negative sense, is they basically organize the heck out of blue. So there's been some research from the Keegan group about the actual levels in organizations, and the espoused values are very clearly orange, or what they would call level 4, but what they call theories in action are almost all blue. In other words, I'm not really an entrepreneur, but my bosses said that this is an entrepreneurial organization, so whatever entrepreneurial rules they give me, I will do, although rather poorly, because obviously if and we see that all the time in self-directed teams, that the blues on the teams just don't get self-direction very well because it's an orange concept. So what we have at orange is an awful lot of, let's line the blue up and march them out. So I wanted to talk just a little bit quickly about the history. And I don't know whether you guys are familiar with the Cynefin, which is spelled C-Y-N. It's a idea of realms of problem solving, is the way I like to describe it. And so when we start out in the blue, everything is clear. We have rules. Now those rules may not be based in reality, right? So for example, we cure a fever by bloodletting. But that's the rules. That's how doctors do it. We believe the sun goes around the earth. Not because we have any reason to believe that, but that's been the rule since the Greeks. So obviously that's correct. And the Middle Ages had folks stuck here in clear rules. And what they had missed is maybe they're not right. And Keegan uses the term self-authored to actually describe moving into the wonder about that rule. And so at first, as I'm going to just go real quick through some of the history, and then you guys can look at this. The idea as orange emerged in the Enlightenment, well, maybe things are more complicated than that. Maybe it's not just what was written down by the Greeks. I wonder what could happen next. So what happened next, we had philosophers, dare to know, to have courage of your own reason, right? Knowledge is granted through accumulated experience rather than accessing some sort of outside truth. And this is Piergraves, right? Blue is the truth force, where we don't need to look any longer. Somebody said it somewhere. And now we believe it, right? And so this change to orange started out with exploration voyages, But one of the early things was actually Luther's Reformation. And there's some thought that just the ability of a thinking man to say to the Catholic Church, now, wait a minute. I mean, some of the stuff you're doing just doesn't sound very godly to me. And the biggest blue influence in Europe was the Catholic Church and keeping things the way they were. And that change of someone questioning it actually came before the physics. And I sometimes forget about that. But then we hear Copernicus, hey, guess what? I actually looked and measured with early telescopes and with early math, and the sun doesn't go around the earth. It can't, right? We have Galileo with his telescopes and ends up getting supreme by the Inquisition. But, you know, his basic philosophy was man can observe the universe for himself, with the maybe apocryphal quote of nevertheless it moves, as he recants his heresy. But that led to something which is almost blue, right? We have an irrefutable, a non-refutable, not an irrefutable, but a non-refutable. And what that means is we can't, it's an axiom that you can't prove. In other words, so the basic concept at that point of science was every cause has an effect. An effect. And every effect has a cause, sorry. So every cause has, and it doesn't say, like we would say now, has multiple causes necessarily, right? So it was linear. And incidentally, as I was looking at history, I suddenly discovered that part of this enlightenment, the first female computer, the first woman, how many know what female computers are? They're women who were hired to do math calculations before calculators, basically. And so the first one that is known was actually hired by an astronomer in France to help him calculate the orbit of a comet. So we began to see innovations like having a woman do something outside the box. And so as we come through this, smallpox vaccine was kind of the end of this first innovative era. And what we find is orange suddenly organizes blue systems, right? Massive, innovative undertaking. So the difference between, to make an undertaking orange, it has to be innovative, right? It's not just doing the same old. So building cathedrals in Europe was not orange. It was just the next blue cathedral. If that difference makes sense. And we have the Industrial Revolution. Interestingly enough, serfdom becomes abolished. And so the capitalists will say, oh yeah, you know, we've taken people out of serfdom, right? One of the things in a modern thinking on this that popped into my mind is, well, or maybe the wealthy industrialist made sure that serfdom was abolished so they had folks to come into their factories. One of the big innovations, I think, in terms of thinking was Darwin's Beagle voyage, right? The origin of the species, just like with Luther's reforms, was a real throw down the gauntlet to the Catholic Church, right? Sorry, guy, and to the Reformed churches, sorry, guys, but I don't care what allegory the Bible uses. The facts are that this is how the earth developed, and it wasn't 600 years old with a 6-day creation. And we end that with rabies vaccine. So we begin to see as we go through, observation does things for human health, right? All of this positive orange. And I don't know if you know the story of rabies, but it was a high risk research. Yeah, I see Bill. You want to say anything about that, Bill?
Well, it's interesting that we always talk about truth, but the truth was that the first kid that he gave it to, if it would have failed, that would have harmed his research and his reputation. So, yeah.
And Don talks about Orange in, I don't know if all of you know the song, The Gambler. Know when to hold him, know when to fold him, know when to walk away, know when to run. And one thing that's missing in there is know when to go all in. And so Orange is not gambling. I mean, gambling is a purple-red phenomena, but Orange is calculated risk, right? So we would describe Pasteur's rabies vaccine as a calculated risk, right? You had a terrible problem. You wanted to solve it. You knew that things couldn't get worse for the poor kid, right? I mean, I don't care what modern medicine would say, don't do experiments on people, but every Alzheimer's patient I know before they get too gone to know will tell you, please experiment on me. My mother told me that. Please feel free to experiment on me at any time, right? So that's that. That's the, not the gambling, but the risk taking of Orange, right? But they're all calculated risks. So if it's a gamble, then it's not healthy Orange. Now, all the way through here, we see Orange as coupled with blue, right? It's innovative, but it's also following rules, Newton's physics, which is not quite linear, but it's down in this realm of Canavan and up into the, and making it more complicated on a daily basis, right? So up until the late 1800s, Orange was basically attempting to take things that had been clear, looking at them saying, heck no, heck no. Harari says that he thinks the big aha of the Enlightenment was, we could be wrong. And I will have to agree that if you tell me you're a scientist and you have any philosophy other than you could be wrong, they could be wrong, we could be wrong, oh my God, I could be wrong. If that's not your absolute philosophy when you do science, then you're not a scientist, right? That's Orange. Question, question, question. So up through here, we've got basically making things more complicated, working through understanding of the physical world. And now we're coming to the, oh my gosh, I went and measured that and it wasn't that simple. So we have relativity from Einstein. And all of a sudden, we're outside the realm of Newton's Newton's complicated equations, right? It's not that easy. Quantum mechanics. And you notice we're getting penicillin. This is the era of women calculators. And if you haven't seen Hidden Figures, you must watch it. I knew those types of women in NASA as they were retiring when I was a young engineer, and smarter than I ever was. I mean, you can't do that kind of work in your head that's now being done with computers. They were the first programmers at NASA when they brought in the early computers. The women who'd been doing the calculations by hand had to program those same calculations into the computers. So tremendously brilliant people. And about this time, Carl Jung, not Freud, Carl Jung demonstrated the existence of unconscious processing. Freud had all of this model, but Young actually went out and measured, and Graves looked at this same sort of thing, thinking that he might be able to understand stages better by looking at unconscious processing. And it has to do with the time that it takes you to respond to things. So both Graves and Young we're looking at that as a possible way to get at how people were processing information. Computers, Sputnik. Then we come to Deming's Kaizen. How many know what Kaizen is? Anybody doesn't?
I don't.
Really? Okay, so after World War II, Japan was being rebuilt, right? Making factories, and they were having trouble kind of figuring out how to do the sort of production that Ford had done with his Model T, right? And so a guy by the name of Deming went over from the US to help them with it. And he came up with this theory of using the workers to help walk through the processes to do continuous improvement. So you'll hear the term continuous improvement, right? And it's worker driven. So literally Kaizen involves walking through the plant, looking for things that are problems. These are the people who put in the idea of every worker had a cord that he could stop the assembly line if he found a problem with quality. They're the folks that say quality is free. It's fixing your mistakes that's expensive.
Right.
So think about that as orange, right? It's no longer the CEO will tell us what the factory has to do. Well, guess what? These people out on the machines are perfect experts at how their machines work. Gee, should we ask them? And so think about that as an orange innovation, right? And then we come to the big difference, and that is questioning reductionism. And this is in the middle of the last century. So the whole can be analyzed by studying each of its constituent parts, which is what Orange has said all the way up to this point, right? We just break it apart and then we'll add them up and it'll be okay. At this point, the whole is not equal to the sum of its constituents and can't be necessarily deduced from the parts, right? And interestingly enough, postmodernism has adulterated this to say the whole is more than the sum of its parts. As an engineer, I can guarantee you that the whole is 99% less than the sum of its parts unless put together perfectly. You see it in mutations, right? That the vast majority of them are fatal, right? So, making changes to the parts doesn't necessarily help the whole. And in the observed world, mostly it doesn't. And so you've all heard of the butterfly effect. So this is all stuff from the middle of the last century. So this is what positive orange looks like, right? First, we're starting with blue ideas. Suddenly, we're continuing to look, maybe not, right? Maybe it's more complex than that. Maybe it's context sensitive. And back here, the idea was, if I knew the initial conditions, I could predict everything. So if I knew what the conditions of every particle were at the Big Bang, I could predict the universe. That, astrology is not wrong in saying if I knew the initial conditions, I could predict. The point is that the way astrologers look at those initial conditions doesn't bear any relationship to what the physics says about them. So that's the plus side of orange, right? That's things that have given us ideas that are useful to us. So what happens to the negative side? Back here in blue, with a heavy red underbelly at this time, right? What we're getting is a world that is very class sensitive, very caste sensitive. And one of the problems with blue is that it's merit oriented. So if I were brought up in a world that thought class was important, and I got the idea of my own merit, I found a few extraordinary men and maybe 1 in a million extraordinary women that I felt had merit that weren't my social peers. Well, that's okay. But then I see all these other people wandering around, and I don't get the context effect, right? At this point, because that's down here a couple centuries away in orange thinking. So I assume that if you're a slum person in London, that you're there because you deserve to be there, right? In other words, you know, the 1 in 1,000 people that you found that worked their way out of that, the exception to the rule says that therefore you didn't need to be there. It's a bootstrap idea, right? And so merit outside of the idea of context is a real problem for Orange. And so that's probably a shadow that came in early because of how stratified society was, that we still haven't lost, right? All the way through the age of empire. You know, as Europeans went around, and a lot of the exploration was red blue, right? The conquistadors were just going to take their religion through Central America without a thought that they weren't making the heathen better off, right? Just never occurs to them that there's anything of merit there. We get into this where I talk about abolishing serfdom. I truly think that it's easy for Orange to have mixed motives. I need workers for my factory. The serfs sitting over there are really bad off, and you know, people who think slavery was somehow different than serfdom, not very much, right? In fact, masters could sell craftsmen away from their families to another master. For example, under serfdom, people weren't allowed to go find a better master, right? So serfdom had a lot of things which Orange found extremely objectionable. But there was also this, what's in it for me, right? And what's in it for me, if I get the government to abolish serfdom, then all the people who hate their landlords are going to be arriving here lining up for jobs in my factory. Same for education. And, you know, it's really interesting to see the differences in education in the rural Midwest versus the education that we got in the eastern cities. In the rural Midwest, every small hamlet had a one-room school, right? And in a lot of cases, the girls teaching it were people that had basically finished what we consider an 8th grade education, and then immediately went to teaching the younger kids, because that's the way one-room schools worked. And every immigrant farmer believed to the bottom of his soul that the only way his kids would be better off in life is if they could read, write, and do arithmetic. And if they understood American government and American politics so that they could be good citizens in their new country. Now you come to the city schools and we have factories, and we need people that can read and write and add and subtract in our factories. It's you know, it is a real pain to run 500 people in an assembly line that can't read and write and add and subtract. Or real pain to keep those people in line. So we needed schools. And so we ran through blue schools, and one-room country schools, I don't think were blue. They, you know, the older kids taught the younger kids. I mean, they were very self-sufficient. They were a bit like Montessori's in concept. But as you turned them into factories, you know, the quality went down, right? And the reason for it was not necessarily very pure. So again, you see another place where orange self-interest, along with that idea that people who haven't made it up through the system as well as I did have less merit, right? So we should just do what we can with them, right? And then we come up and there's some green ideas coming in here, right? But there's also a real green distortion of postmodern, which is that because things are not deterministic, that therefore there is no reality. Nothing is better than the other. And that's not what the science says. The science very clearly says that the whole is mostly less than the sum of its parts, and you better be darn careful not to choose those catastrophic outcomes. And you'll never know and I think what science would say about that is you will never know the best outcome. And you know, airlines are having so much trouble because they think they can micromanage a complex adaptive system, right? But I can guarantee you that I can give you 500 outcomes that not only won't work, a couple of them will probably lead to world destruction, right? And so it's not symmetrical. And somehow that asymmetrical idea escaped postmodernism. It shouldn't have escaped Green, right? Green has the perfect capacity to understand it, but somehow that shadow of postmodern distortion in Green then distorts Orange as well, right? And then if you don't know Said, you definitely need to read his work, because he would say about here comes the only money matters overlay on Orange. And up until this time, money was a counter. It was a scorekeeper for Orange. And it also was an enabler. In other words, we talked about needing to build a big factory. We need capital to do that, right? So it was an enabler and a scorecard. All of a sudden, it becomes the be-all, end-all. And we're down the rabbit hole of financialization. And if you've never, and Orange people ask this question, not well before and it's the Orange approaching Green, I would say, that asks it, but Orange people ask the question, okay, so I'm going to have most of my financialized economy in the virtual world, Facebook, Google, TikTok, right? Now, when's the last time you ate a bitter bite? When's the last time you got shelter from a Facebook post? Oh, it's cold outside. Is Facebook going to keep you warm? And you see commercials from Meta applying that it is, right? That somehow this virtual world will have positive impacts in the real world. And one of the implications is in training, and certainly flight simulators and things like that have been really good. on that idea. But to think that we're going to make the majority of our economy, and from the Wall Street side, the majority of financialization in the economy comes from not anything that you can eat, get shelter from. It's from the virtual world, bits, bytes, games, right? And that's sort of a problem. And I hear people like, I think are positive orange saying that and noticing that, right? So that's where we're at now. So we've noticed complexity, right? And we've now noticed that where we're living right now is absolute chaos. And there's this area between the realms of decision making that's called confusion. Is it really that simple? Is it truly chaotic, or is there a pattern to it, right? And what I think has been happening in the last 50 years is this area of confusion has been expanding. And some of it purposefully, by social media and stuff that's preventing science from telling its answers to people. How many remember the tobacco lobby fiascos, right? They basically bought crooked scientists to do research that didn't prove that smoking was safe. It attempted to throw doubt on whether it was unsafe. And so there's another place where we see a good idea in orange. There is no such thing as truth or proof. Everything could be falsified. And so when you do research, you're not trying to prove that your research is correct. You're trying to see where it might be wrong, in what areas your model wouldn't work. Well, if I take that to the extreme, then I can design research that basically puts in doubt any idea. So it's basically totally destroyed faith in science. And that's a problem, right? Because things that are over here and moving over into there have answers, right? And particularly they have bad answers that we can rule out. And if we continue to attempt to suborn that process by doing fake research to pretend that things that are true aren't, then we're in big trouble. And I think that ability to buy a scientist who pretends to be orange and is probably nothing but the latest Al Capone, in fact. It's just easier to rob a bank from the inside than it is with a gun, right? So that's where we are with this.
Great, Barbara, thanks. Do we have a kickoff question for the discussion?
I think the kickoff question I would like to ask is, in your own history, where have you encountered healthy orange? I'll start that with when I was in the space program back in the 70s. There was a lot of competition, but people knew how to cooperate in large groups for a idea, for a vision, right? And that ability of orange to find just a huge important idea and line up blue assets to go to work on it was incredibly invigorating. And you don't find much of that anymore.
Well, interestingly enough, it's probably the healthiest orange I ever encountered was in an organization that I'll say that it it operated on the very edge, skirting into the unhealthy. But it was overall healthy. It was a Canadian multinational, privately owned. Was not a publicly traded corporation. It was a privately owned corporation. The owner, gentleman by the name of Jimmy Pattison, took very deep interest in all of his companies. And he was somewhat enlightened in the sense that he was very fair. He had some very clear goals. He held people responsible. He encouraged innovation and supported innovation. There's some elements of that ultimately didn't prove to be healthy for the whole system, but that's probably the place where I, working for one of his divisions, one of his manufacturing divisions, as their CFO, was probably the healthiest example of pure orange that I was ever in. The other thing probably, and this, I don't know if this is relevant, but science fiction, I think, to a large extent, extols the virtues of healthy orange.
Yeah, I'll leave this to you to determine healthy or orange in some respect, because I went back through my resume and I wasn't coming up with much there. But at present, I would say I'm involved with a faith-based group. So we got blue going on there. It's a Quaker group, so there's a certain amount of green going on. And we're doing work that has to do with reparations for Black people in the US, in the community. And looking at, here's where the orange comes in. Is it to center the voices of the Black members of our community, as opposed to the dominant white members? And I don't know, go at that, Barbara or anybody else, and say what you think about that assessment.
There's a really narrow line there, Viv, between enabling and the marginalized communities to take their rightful place in the business world, or and giving them a place to simply whine like the Me Too movement has for women, right? Instead of saying, instead of teaching girls what to do when somebody puts his hands on you, the Me Too movement basically says, oh, you poor little thing, right? And it's certainly true is that it's outrageous that a man would dare to place his hands on me. But giving me a forum to whine about it versus teaching me how to put him down if I have to is a different viewpoint. And the orange viewpoint would be, I need to enable, right? The orange viewpoint is always whatever I do is going to teach people how to fish. It's not going to let them whine about not being allowed to fish in the past, right?
To empower, to make funds available. Let's say the first was to make funds available for the purpose of untangling titles.
Yes. Oh
So
God,
see.
yes. That is a perfect orange example. Yep. That's exactly right. That's what orange does. It finds a problem, no complaints about it, right? We've agreed it's a problem. Fix it. Let's go. Josh?
Yeah, so I had a friend for several years who I guess I always considered, once I started to understand spiral dynamics, healthy orange, maybe some unhealthy components too, like everyone, but I think his center of gravity was definitely that. He was a software engineer, into physical fitness, so that we didn't share the software thing, but the physical fitness thing, and then also the self-development world. So that's kind of where he and I found overlap. And I think self-development stuff, the best of that is healthy orange. The worst of it is obviously toxic stuff or red or who knows what. But one of the things that we had in common was kind of like understand. So I was been working as a coach, and some of that is in the dating realm and stuff like that. So he was one of the few people who would kind of go out on the town with me and sort of just like do social experiments. We talk to people, women and men, but like we talk to women and kind of share our dating experiences and whatnot. And, anytime I get into green stuff, environmental stuff, he was okay with that. Some of the social stuff, not so much, but he was tolerant of it. And so I was like, all right, healthy orange. Maybe he's not like really into these causes as much, but he knows I am, and he's cool with it. This feels like healthy orange or whatever. Then came a time where, so a lot of the stuff we were talking about is kind of our dating lives or whatever, and theories on that, and even science studies, whatever. And there was a point where I was going through a situation. It was kind of one of the toughest times of my life a couple of years ago. And I said, and there was a situation with a woman, and I was talking to him about it. And then he basically says, like, listen, I don't want to hear about that. I was like, okay. I was a little hurt, of course, my green feelings were hurt, but also I was like, well, this is one of our like main common threads. I'm not sure now what to talk to him about. I started thinking, wow, if this is the only real overlap we had. I was like, all right. So I stopped texting him for a while, and I didn't hear from him for literally months. And I was like, oh, geez. And then finally I did hear back from him, and it was for him to complain about a woman. And I was like, are you serious? So what I processed there was like, he didn't have that like much of the outside of myself thing when it was convenient and useful for him. He liked the friendship whenever I was actually in a difficult spot. He wasn't really there for me. And then he turned around and did the very thing that he said he didn't want for me onto me. And that's kind of when I stepped away from the friendship, so that was just a realization about the limits of orange. And at that point I realized, I do have overlap with folks in orange, and I do want to be friends and acquaintances with them, but to have a deeper connection with somebody, I'm going to need to have folks who are not as much in that center of gravity solely. So that's just one personal experience that I think is around orange.
Saphir?
Yes, I want to look at another aspect that really concern all of us about why did the healthy orange, or where and why did the healthy orange didn't succeed to be accepted values in certain societies. And we mainly see it in religion, which are over the time in the US, I can see it, but in many other countries, especially in Israel, I don't know how much you know about the Orthodox Jewish, the ones that wear black. You probably see it in the US a lot. Those communities in Israel are very closed, and they don't agree to teach the children anything else but the Torah. So they don't learn even mathematics or English. And those kids, when they become grown people, they are unable to work because there are lack of the basic knowledge to even be part of the workforce. So they live over the taxes of the other population. And because they're making so many children, and this is becoming a major problem, because right now there are almost 20% of the voting populations, but in 2060 there will be half of the population if they keep doing children, which is part of their making children is the rejection of healthy blue, which is looking about the economic and about what will be, how good how sustainable lives they can give to those children. They just keep doing it because they have this blue. And of course, it's become very clear that they are supporting racism. They prefer in the specific Israel areas, they're preferring laws and money that go for Jews and not for Arabics. They're totally racist. And I think in the US, you have quite the same problem with some of Christian communities. Also, of course, we see what happened in Iraq when the blue community is actually doing they are not accepting any orange in. So what I'm trying to understand is what in history could really break down the attachment to blue in order to achieve some healthy orange into it. And I haven't studied enough to understand what happened, but maybe somebody can help me. What will help to achieve a healthy orange?
You know, I think there's also a purple underlying there that's pulling people back into it. But I think that what you see here worldwide, we see it in Islam, we see it with really most fundamentalist religions, is something that Harari talks about of the myths that hold a group of people together are more powerful if they're farther from reality, right? So fundamentalism basically is pushing myths that make it very hard, as you were just pointing out, to live in the modern world, right? And if you look at the Amish here in the United States, that they are very much like your Jews in Israel, in that they actually remove themselves from modern society to a large part because they think the contamination of modern society will draw their kids away from their fundamentalist beliefs, which is exactly the truth. Maybe we need to grab somebody from the Mormon church. There are a few that I know that have in fact is Christian on. I thought I saw him a little while ago to talk a little bit about this. So Mormons are deliberately developmental with their kids, and they are extremely good orange stewards of financial assets. Extremely good.
Take it away, Christian.
All right, hold on, give me a second. Yeah, I can definitely talk a little bit about that side of things. Yeah, I mean, I do feel, I mean, the culture and structure of Mormonism, there's, I mean, definitely like a foundation of blue, but also kind of like, you know, the higher ups are definitely in orange. And there's this kind of like, you know, yeah, I mean, my experience growing up, because again, I was there for like 20 years, from 2 to 22. Yeah, you would see, I mean, because there was like people that were like, you know, again, like bishops or general authority that were like, you know, like these high level kind of like executives, or they were like dentists. I think one of my bishops early on in one of my wards, he was like an FBI agent. So again, like I always kind of growing up, I would look up to these people. I'm like, oh yeah, these guys are like, I didn't know it at the time, but yeah, looking back now, yeah, they were like all orange, essentially. You know, they were kind of this like, you know, upper middle class people that I don't know. It was interesting. So there was this kind of dynamic in Mormonism where it's just kind of most of the membership is blue, but then there's definitely certain people that are kind of running the show that are orange. So there's definitely certain distinctions there. I don't know. I wouldn't call it, you know, a health. I mean, yeah, there's certain aspects that are healthy, but but there's certain like dark, manipulative, deceptive, hiding certain truths or histories within Mormonism. So
So why do you
yeah, I
think
wouldn't.
why do you think Mormons are not so afraid of the outside world the way the Amish are? I don't know if you know any Amish, but what
don't.
is it about? And maybe it's that it has a lot of purple underlying. At least I've seen that. You know, really nice welcoming of children into the community, even up through the teens, that modern life doesn't have. But what else would you think makes them less afraid of interaction with the world?
I mean, well, that move when they were moving out to Utah, I mean, at the time it was still Mexico. So I wouldn't entirely say that, like, they were, because again, they were trying to build their own thing outside of the US, because again, the polygamy and like some of their practices. So they were trying to kind of do the Amish thing, but really couldn't, because again, like a year or two later, Utah, California, Texas became part of the United States. So then they're like, oh, well, again, they just couldn't keep running from the US. So eventually, I mean, again, like if you go to Utah, like, I mean, even today, the biggest majority kind of like, like the whole culture, even the government down there is Mormon, so, or they have some kind of Mormon influence embedded in it, and has since the very beginning of Utah. So, yeah, it's I don't know, it's definitely, its integration with modern United States laws and culture has been interesting. And, there is like the mainstream Mormonism, the LDS church, but then there's also, which again, it's interesting because, yeah, like most ex-Mormons definitely refer to it as like the LDS Inc., like it's an incorporation, and it does have claims to IP, it does have intellectual property. So it's, it is kind of viewed as like, the corporation, and yeah.
Thinking about the founding, and thinking about the idea that Luther sort of kicked off Enlightenment by beating the Catholic Church down a bit. I'm wondering if Mormonism was sort of founded in that same orange innovation mode, right? From the start.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of tough to kind of gauge. Well, can you describe it in a different way? Maybe I'm not fully understanding.
Well, Luther was an extremely blue man, right? And some of the offshoots, like Calvinism, had no orange components whatsoever. Nasty blue. Others had huge orange components in them. So, but I'm thinking, when you're founded in doing things differently, right? In questioning the status quo on religion, versus looking at Judaism, which has a 6,000-year history at least of status quo. Maybe there's one of your differences, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Mormonism is definitely current day, it's definitely trying to become more kind of Christianized and focus more on Jesus. But yeah, there's its evolution. I don't know, it's been interesting because I do feel like there is this kind of like, again, like a heavy set of the membership population is at blue. And there's, if you go back to some of the earlier prophets, again, like they do have these like conservative blue values, and like they go into like preaching mode, and again, like they all contradict themselves at different times, so it's like this hard to kind of like well, so again, like there was like one, because again, like current day LDS members don't call themselves Mormons, and like even the current prophets like, oh, we don't call ourselves Mormon anymore. Da, da, da. So but then if you go back a few prophets ago, they're like, oh, we are, like he was like super proud about being Mormon, and like he like, you know, endorsed that. It was like all for it, and it's just kind of like, I don't know, it's those weird kind of contradiction, and you know, there's a lot of like within the current LDS population, the ex-Mormons, we call them TBMs, true believing Mormons. They, I don't know, they just have like a lot of like mental gymnastics that they'll do to justify, rationalize their position and their views and their beliefs.
Right, and thinking back to Israel, the more and the Amish, the more interaction you have with the modern world, the harder it is to convince your kids that those beliefs make any sense at all.
No,
Brandon.
I can jump in about what situation in Israel. It's amazing because the Blue came with a new idea in order to convince their children to keep avoiding orange values. And what they say is the successful of Israel came from, they don't use orange value, but came from people that doing money and all the orange values, because those peoples are the donkey of the Messiah. Have you heard this term? The donkey of the Messiah. They say the Messiah will come on a donkey.
Oh,
The donkey is the non-religious people that make an army and make money in order for the Messiah to come, and we are just a donkey actually. And this is and you have to be prepared by not joining them, just ride on them. This is the crazy theory, but it worked perfectly for them.
Brandon, I want to cut in here, Brandon. I didn't mean to cut you off, but we have a resident Mormon. I couldn't resist.
Oh, sure. You got to take up opportunities that are presented to you. So in my mind, something, this isn't purely positive or negative, but something that's very distinctive about Orange is an ability to adapt to broader societal changes. So whether that's a positive or a negative thing is going to be contextual based on like whether the societal changes themselves are positive or negative. So my personal experience with this, like on the positive side, is seeing like how Orange corporations are basically adapting to a world of like LGBT acceptance. Like I work for a large Orange corporation, and they're very, they've appropriated some green values in like a healthy way. For example, they're very accepting of LGBT couples, not uncommon at all in like tech industry for organizations to offer benefits to same-sex couples, which, you know, isn't a thing that happened like 15, 20 years ago. So that's like a positive aspect. But the other side of that, the darker side of that, is that part of the adaptivity of Orange is Orange can also adapt itself, say, to fascism, which is something that can and like does like happen.
Pat, go ahead. Thank you, Brandon.
Okay, I want to quickly say something about Brandon's comment, and that is the tech world is very accommodating to new things, but what I found was just funny as a personal story. I joined GE Digital, which I know, who knows if it's really, they wanted to be a tech world, and I was just, you know, living in sin. For those of you who have a religious background, with my boyfriend, and I tried to sign up for insurance the first few days of joining GE, and they said, I've tried different combinations on entering the data, and it was like same-sex couple or married, and I was like, wow, you guys are so discriminatory. So if I was living with my same-sex girlfriend, I could have got insurance for her, but I couldn't get insurance for my boyfriend. So I was like, this is not green. This is discrimination. anyways, I just wanted to throw that in there. So even though they try to be like really progressive, yeah, it's greenwashing. So I had to get married. Can you believe that? The establishment got me. I told my husband, my boyfriend, like, you can either become a woman, or I could become a man, or we could just get married. And so we both decided we would just get married. So we had a good discussion. Anyways, that was a separate good. I'm glad this is recorded for all of the internet to purview and think about. Anyways, I'm very happily married. It turned out to be good decision 8 years later. Okay, so I was thinking about religion because I think about that a lot. And I think that Luther started off, and actually this is coming in from the Ian McGilchrist stuff that I'm trying to convince other people to read. Everyone should read that book. We're going to do a thing on it in a few months. But I think that, you know, the Reformation started with Luther becoming orange in some ways. Like, he was thinking, hey, we can make our own decisions. We don't have to wait for the priest. We could read the Bible ourselves, and all the things that went along with that, with the Bible being translated into English. And I think then it got co-opted into being again blue with a lot of things. But I think the orange ideology of, we can interpret the Bible ourselves. We can make our own decisions. We don't have to wait around for the priest to tell us. And the whole thing about being, allowing to sin if you pay the money, right? There's all of that. So I just want to read this. I asked ChatGPT, which religion has the most spiral dynamics orange level values? And I just want to read this to you. I literally typed it in. I don't know what it's going to say because I just typed it in. Spiral dynamics. Okay, I'm not going to read the definition. Okay, therefore, it's not possible to determine which religion has the most orange levels. Okay, however, orange level values are individual achievement, materialism. So religions that prioritize these values, blah, blah, blah. Examples would be some in forms of Protestantism, oh my gosh, I can't talk today. Protestantism or New Age spirituality. Anyways, that's what ChatGPT says. I just want to throw that in there to keep it modern. But thanks. Back to you.
Except, so ChatGPT actually didn't hit the big ones, which are the orange megachurches. For example, one in Houston bought the basketball stadium and fills it. And it's a prosperity gospel, right? If you're religious, God will make you prosperous. And it's communitarian in the sense that we will help each other become prosperous, right? Which religious groups have done in the past. I mean, Jews in their ostracism were well known for helping each other with business throughout the Middle Ages and the Enlightenment. So I think that there's a specific answer to that. And it would be interesting to think about whether there are non-Christian religions that are orange. So we can all ponder that. Christian, did you have another comment?
Yeah, I do want to say, so again, when I was studying direct response copywriting and marketing, they would refer back, because again, like a lot of these old school style marketing methods come back from like the 1930s, but a set of groups that were using direct mail to kind of influence and get response from an audience, get money, get revenue coming in, were these prosperity gospel churches. They highly leveraged direct response marketing and direct mail to kind of influence and get revenue from mail order style marketing. And I studied them, and I think there was a big segment on the John Oliver, the show, the Daily Show or style Daily Show. He did maybe an hour. I think he did 2 segments on them actually. But yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I feel like different, like the LDS Church and a few other organizations, like religious organizations, have certain aspects of orange locked down, but I feel like the prosperity gospel groups are like opposite there. Like they have that system with that green or that orange machine locked down at a very sophisticated level.
Yeah, that started with some of the TV and radio preachers as well, didn't it?
Right.
I have
Yeah,
a coffee cup.
Go ahead, Bat.
Okay, so I got a letter in the mail, like snail mail, yesterday. That was Jehovah Witness. It was just a pamphlet. There was no like, Bet, we think that you should think about this. I'm just doing this as an example of a 100% unorange. There's no like, it was just the worst possible. I just ripped it right in half and threw it in the garbage. You know, it's direct mail, but it's not direct marketing in any orange way. That's just a coffee cup comment.
Brandon?
So I think one thing societally that we could do, and obviously like easier said than done to encourage a healthy orange, is limit the ability for orange to game the system and force them into like an adapt or die mindset. Basically, like it's the difference between, for example, fossil fuel companies entrenching themselves and basically gaming the rules of the system in their benefit versus green energy companies that like use market niches in healthy ways to solve societal problem or contribute like in as far as like orange can contribute to like solving a societal problem.
And unfortunately, with the credits for green energy, the huge ones for massive industrial wind and solar, it's the quotes green energy robber barons that are really gaming the system now. Totally uneconomic projects just being put in right and left because you make money on the credits. Same as the oil business had done for years, right? So I think you're absolutely right. You know, the capitalists who say the government just should not be picking winners and losers because the government is too darn stupid to know, right? They have a point. And yet, how do we fund research? How do we fund pilot projects without picking the next robber baron to fund and give a monopoly from the government?
Yeah, the thing about public funds is they don't have like it's like a space for like things that don't have to be like profitable like immediately. Like for example, like the internet was like a DARPA project. GPS was like built basically using like public funds. Stuff like space exploration, it's not really like it kind of like structure isn't in a place where it's going to work with like market incentives. Maybe that can come later, but like there's a lot of value for using public funds like outside of like a market system, and then market like mechanisms can come in like later.
Right, and when you leave those public funds with the folks that are making your campaign contributions too long, you end up gaming the system. And so I think from an orange viewpoint, probably I would say the name of the game is not who to fund initially. It's how quickly to stop funding and to not put in massive funding at the pick winners and losers level, but rather to catalyze all of the pilot projects, right?
Yeah, and I think it needs to be correlated with a high degree of like functional democracy too. Like it's going to be as healthy as like the democracy is.
Oh, duh. Yeah, and certainly we do have that problem, don't we, Brand?
Mm-hmm. Just a little bit.
Saphir.
Let me jump in.
Sorry.
One of the problems that I see that the whole system really faces right now, and it could somewhat be captured in the swing back and forth between the individual and the collective components of spiral dynamics, is that it's the conundrum that the collective is made up of individuals. You can't have a collective without individuals. And because the way individuals are structured, they don't exist well in collectives. And so you have this, currently we have, and I maybe put it in the simplest way, the problem that we have right now is we have incredibly entrenched, powerful collective organizations doing incredibly horrible things to the environment. But because of the way that society structures the whole thing, they are run by individuals. And there is an individual, a corporation doesn't decide to ravage a forest. And individuals in the company decide to set corporate goals, to structure things in certain ways, to lobby governments to allow them to do those things. It's not the corporations themselves, it's the individuals in there. And it's that dynamic between the two that causes the problem. And again, referring back to what Bet was saying earlier about the McGilchrist book, it's individuals are capable of basically cutting themselves off from reality. And because they run corporations, because they structure societies to benefit those corporations, they de facto cut those corporations off from reality.
Well, and if any of you aren't aware of the research on mass formation, I prefer Jung's original term of mass psychosis, where he thought that German Nazism was just a manifestation of the psychotic mindset of the German public after the problems with post-World War I. And he actually at one point said something like, Hitler as the catalyst of this wasn't so much a catalyst, he was like a screen upon which that psychosis could be projected, right? If you know the term projection from psychology. And so what happens there is we then get a psychotic individual who is charismatic and on whom people with the same probably neurotic originally problems can project their own problems and offer them simplistic and non-useful solutions. A very, very bad outcome. So I want to, as a moderator, is there anyone else who hasn't talked that would like to talk about positive orange?
Actually, Barbara, I just want to mention, because I did talk about the church thing, but I do want to kind of give a little bit more of a personal example. So I think that as far as like positive orange, I think one of the first real experiences I've had with kind of like this positive orange was kind of in the Vegas tech startup space. So here in Vegas, there was Tony Hsieh at the time was moving his organization, his company from Henderson over to downtown Vegas. And again, he was buying up a lot of property, investing in startups. So again, that was like 2000 and like around early 2012, 2013, 14, when things start to like really kind of, start to like Life is Beautiful and all these different big events started popping off. And but yeah, I think that was the first time I was really exposed to that environment where, again, like there's, this a lot of like investors come in, a lot of, startups, the lean startup methodology, these kind of ideas of kind of like lean manufacturing, but applied to like software, applied to kind of running, a startup and validating their hypothesis. And so there was this kind of like scientific orange mindset that I was starting to get exposed to. And so yeah, I think that was kind of like, again, there was certain really powerful, healthy side of orange that I got exposed to at that time. and then yeah, then you know everything in between, some green, some blue, a little bit of this and that, shadows from all sides. So yeah, that was like super powerful. And I think even now I'm actually going through it, and I think I mentioned in the comments before prior to this event, like I'm currently going through the Google Project Management Certification Program. And again, just for my own personal, enhancement of my career and skills. And because again, like I've managed projects in the past, more digital marketing projects, and I've used like Kanban, I used some like lean ideas that I kind of heard or picked up, but I've never fully studied project management in full detail. And yeah, there's definitely some very specific concepts and frameworks that I honestly wish I should have known like 10 years ago. And I think it would have really helped me, my career and understanding of the corporate world and corporate America and as a whole, and how to manage projects. And yeah, I'm definitely learning a lot of, again, like these ideas, these concepts around project management, I'm perceiving as very effective orange and highly effective strategic orange methodologies. And yeah, they do a really good job of like giving you the entire beginning to end of a project. And some things that again, like even like that I've seen, especially I worked in nightclub for a little while, and I would see like sometimes some of the people that would be buying out like these bottle services were companies themselves, like celebrating a successful, exit or a successful project. And they're just like celebrated. I've seen it like Uber, again, like they bought a bunch of tables at one point when they got, I think they opened up Vegas as the Uber. So I don't know, again, like I'm just kind of perceiving the entire, I mean, again, like asset management and workflow, and specifically in project management, as these are like effective concepts and skills of healthy orange. So.
And that's really interesting, because I put most of that, any kinds of business certifications, as a bit of the blue codification of the way orange works, right? So, and it's very helpful for a young novice who hasn't been in the world for a while, to have somebody at Orange sort of write down what they do in a systematic blue methodology. And then the problem becomes, I used to do root cause analysis of catastrophic problems, right? And one of the things that, not all that recently came out, is, well, you should check the checklists first. And it's like, are you kidding me? These organizations execute those checklists perfectly. I've never, ever found a root cause that was on the checklist. Duh, that's why things fail, particularly with the catastrophic cascading failures. So what Orange does then is looks at those, and then once you understand how the system works, good Orange project managers then notice the things that aren't on the checklist, and they notice the problems that aren't solved by executing the checklist better. And so that's what Orange adds to this. So in the Canavan one, so we're going from the simple to the complicated, and so these things teach the complicated really well. And then what good project managers do is move onto the left side of that, and really scan the environment all the time for when they're in one of those two left side of complex or even chaotic situations, and take the actions that can never be put on a checklist. So we have a couple people who haven't spoken yet, and then I'll catch people who have. Bill?
Thanks, Barbara. It's a great presentation. Thank you very much. Lots of things to think about. First of all, when you said that Hitler was someone that the collectively traumatized population could project their fears and things on, course, that's exactly what psychohistory does. And that's what the film that I showed you a few weeks ago is basically talking about, which is what we will try to talk about in a few weeks when I get time to do it. But I really liked your comment about truth, and that that we could sort of find the truth ourselves. I don't know if that was Galileo or one of those people way back when, but I see
John
that.
Locke, actually,
Okay.
philosopher,
see-
not scientist.
Okay. I see that for my version of Healthy Orange would be the Iowa Department of Ophthalmology. It's a wonderful place. And I just was at a clinical conference there yesterday on Zoom. And very much like there is a truth. I suppose it's a small t truth. You know, there's a science out there. There's a best way to handle all these problems. And, you know, they haven't quite gotten into the complexity point where there are multiple different ways of handling things. But that was a healthy one for me. I was also listening to a Grand Rounds on Tuesday from Minnesota, and it was an interesting case of a guy probably about my age who had a little bump on his eyelid, and it just looked like a little infection or something, but it wouldn't go away. And about 3 months later, they biopsy it, and it turns out to be an invasive carcinoma, and it's already gone into the eye muscle, and the recommendation was to remove the entire, not only eye, but the whole orbit. And this was very traumatic to the gentleman, obviously, as it would be to any of us. And the student was bringing that up, and that, you know, how do you deal with that? And of course, she's a resident. She's taught to be scientific and whatnot. So she searches the literature for various articles. There aren't very many about the psychological aspects of having to have your eye removed. But it's nice to see that she's maybe getting more into the complicated part of that. So anyway, I think those are healthy versions of orange.
Yeah, and one of the things that really makes orange individually healthier is to teach orange folks about context and systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the more a person who's at center of gravity orange understands about, you know, context, a physicist would call it initial conditions, right? The more Healthy Orange understands about how much impact context has on things, and the more that they understand how complex adaptive systems work, the better their decisions are, and the less likely they are to be in the linear, I have a nail, I have a hammer, so it must be a nail sort of mode, which is back down in the lower right. So that's a really important aspect. And it's things, if you want to develop Healthy Orange, to continually be teaching people about. Daryl, you had a thought.
Yeah, no, interesting conversation. I been listening to everyone because I came in late, but I did pick up when I was listening this discussion about the prosperity gospel, of which I'm a product of. I spent 30 years in the Pentecostal church, at least 25, if not 30, something like that. And I would tell you, you know, the prosperity gospel had some positive attributes. Now, if you could cynically step back and sort of clinically analyze the situation and go, you know, they're just bilking people, right? And trust me, from being involved with Pentecostal prosperity gospel folks, I've seen it all, the whole array, you know, from Reverend Ike back in the day, who would say, you know, don't send me no change. I mean, that was his hook, because he was always asking for money, and he let you know, don't send me a little bit of money, send me a lot. And so that's one end of the spectrum. And then, you know, you had another end of the spectrum where you had folks like in Los Angeles, doing things that were very enterprising as a church, reaching out to help people on drugs and building, almost like incubators of businesses, we talk about the startup world. Some churches were involving themselves with helping people to get up and get productive economically. And so the prosperity gospel had some, for sure, some characters, but I would say I knew a lot of people who subscribed to that philosophy of religion, I guess you can call it. And as I look at their lives, where they are now, the habits that they have and the life that they lead, it did help them become successful people. And being informed by a reasonably healthy blue, they are good citizens, I guess is how I would put it, in terms of healthy orange, pure nodal, I'll call it healthy orange, something that is just mature, sits on top of several other dense, fully formed mean stacks. A company in Mexico that the Adhesis Institute worked with, I worked at the intersection of Adhesis methodology and spiral dynamics, and Adhesis was all about corporate healing, so to speak. They consider themselves corporate therapists, which I really appreciate that thought. But they had a case where a hurricane had come to a city in which Frieza is the name of the company. I think they do cement. I'm not sure what their business is, but they're big in the world. They became very large in that business. And the hurricane came through, but because they had a number of healthy practices, which you could almost say in some instances seemed like early stage green, but for the most part, it was a family-owned business that cared about their people. So you take the Mexican goodness of having a tight-knit family extended to a corporation environment, ran by a family that actually cared for the community and was very rich and very successful. But when that hurricane hit, they had built such a healthy orange organization about being a successful company dealing in the world in the manner that they were. When that hurricane came, everybody came out, volunteered, managers, line workers, everybody was there, and they all were saying how wonderful it was to be at Frieza, that Frieza cared about the people, And so that was one that stands out to me as a manifestation of a healthy orange experience, and like any of them, the prosperity gospel thing, yeah, like any religion, you got these zealots who go way off on the goofy end, and then you got some people who actually subscribe to the Christian part of it, love thy brother type thing, as opposed to just give me money. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
I grew up in the sort of Protestant work ethic, which was very multi-mimetic, and I think parents thought of their duty, to sort of train their adolescent brats up into blue, healthy adults. But they also went very much beyond that. They were very entrepreneurial. And I can remember my great-grandmother saying to me one day, "Yeah, honey, that's hard. So what you do when you got a problem is first you pray about it, and then you get the heck off your knees and you do something."
That's right.
Now that is not blue.
That's good
Blue would be
advice.
go ask the priest what to do, right? Blue and orange is get off your knees and you do something. And that's in the physical world, that's in the metaphysical world, that's in the spiritual world, right? So those gospels that went all the way up to orange seem to be a little bit healthier than the ones that get stuck in a red blue.
Well, yeah, and you can get stuck anywhere, right?
You can get stuck anywhere. And you can revert anywhere, right?
Right, and you could exist perfectly well, contributing in a self-actualizing manner at one level, never aspiring, even knowing what it means to go to another level. That's what I'm always concerned that folks seem to have a tendency to want to spiral up in their intention or in their observation, however you want to look at it. They want to spiral up to the next level of complexity. But I'm always reminded that Billy Graham, who was as blue can be, but he was one of your more healthier expressions of blueness in all its wonderfulness, all its essential purpose, transcendent purpose was Billy Graham's life, and the world's all the better for it. I just think it's important to remember that. Now, who is a counterpart to Billy Graham in blue and orange? I don't know. I think the guy who's the founder of this, what's that company that make apparel? Patagonia.
Oh, Patagonia?
Yeah, that's another very healthy expression of orange. And there's this new movement called Benefits Corporation, which is orange solving its own problems, of avarice and all the negative shadow things of orange. I think the B Corporation is a movement that's just starting, and Patagonia is one of the first in the United States to be a B Corporation, which is a benefits corporation, which means we exist not only solely for the benefit of stockholders, owners of the company, but for the workers, for the environment that the company operates in, and so on and so forth. So it's an entirely different construct under the corporate environment.
It's somewhat the founder of Whole Foods Market.
Yes. Right.
Somewhat
And-
that way. Well,
And then you see the shadow side of this, right? So there is then an industry totally predatory of developing blue checklists for proving that you're a benefit corporation, just exactly the same way that organic has gone from being something of healthy farming, right, to
Straight up marketing.
massive corporations can have their checklists for the most unhealthy food in the known universe. And so they're in, it's so narrow of trying to keep it healthy, but we're in a, Graves would have said, the life conditions don't require orange. The life conditions can't even be solved by green now, right? And so the problem is, regardless of how healthy an individual or an organization is at orange or at green, the life conditions are beyond that. And as all we can do is help as many folks that aren't ready for second tier to be healthy where they're at.
Yeah, that's the bigger emphasis. Yeah.
Doug, you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I actually have a question. So I love what you said a little bit ago about, how to help people become more healthy orange. That's, part of the purpose of why I'm here today is I have several employees at my therapy practice that, we've shared spiral dynamics. We have some conversations about development, and I have a couple of people that are very orange, and they very much think that they're yellow, and they want to be yellow, and I'm having some difficulties with them in just some ways. And you said about helping educate them on context and systems theory, like systems, help them kind of think about beyond themselves a little bit. Would you have any more suggestions, or would anyone else here have any suggestions on how I could also just help them understand a little bit more that it's not just about them, and some of their desire for money or prestige or expertness is actually maybe hurting them in some way, or how do I any other thoughts on how do I help them grow and develop, or just be the best orange that they can be?
Yeah, really
be the best orange
that's
that you can be is the first thing. So
Yes.
my first question is always, what does their meme stack look like? So I will tell you, after experience with Enron in Houston, that if you have the modern affluent American spoiled brats, they have no healthy blue concept of limits. And my great grandmother brought me up knowing that there were things you just didn't do. And in some cases, we've also lost concepts of purple limits. For example, don't harm children. So some of the pushback of exposing 5-year-olds to drag queen strip dances I mean, that should be a purple. What the blazes are you thinking? That is not helpful to children, right? We don't give a darn about the adults who are doing this, you know, protect the children. And so we're missing a lot of that healthy purple, just gut reaction of what the heck, right? And then we're also often missing healthy blue limits. And I don't mean in a religious sense. I just mean in a limits in all areas. You know, people who've had healthy blue sets will, when they're in their healthy orange, will tell you, I know I'm skating on thin ice here. I know I'm pushing the limits. I know I'm taking risk. I swear to God, the Enron people had no clue that there were any limits. You know, and anything you can think up to do, perfectly okay. And so, I don't know how you nowadays, especially in a business situation, how you even analyze that. Have you done any of the SDI assessment instruments on them?
No.
Some of them will show the holes in your meme stack, right? I don't necessarily use them because a lot of times I'll get it from the first 5 minutes of talking with people.
Right.
But in a business, Daryl?
No, I was going to add to what you just said. Also, when people are already informed about spiral dynamics and they understand the spiraling, their aspirations becomes their answers. So if they're aware, like usually if you do an assessment, at least in a class situation anyway, we usually would do an assessment before anybody even had a conversation about spiral dynamics.
Exactly.
Right. So some of the people who came would know it and kind of would answer accordingly. But you know, I think it's always a challenge trying to categorize people and put them in a place. And that's difficult. I mean, you know, your observation is that they're orange because you're observing certain behaviors that seems very I, me, my centered. And the way I would put that is like, well, there's people in the world with all kinds of problems. You might have people coming into the practice that have blue and red issues. Well, orange person could handle that theoretically, but it'd be better to match them with a therapist who resonates red and blue, so to speak. I mean, so you try to match up who they are with the life conditions they're experiencing or work conditions that they're experiencing with the services they, you know, want to provide, and just do an impedance match. You know, hire a blue coach to work with a blue environment team, so to speak, something like that. But that's a tough one. But I think it's always hard to.
And I wouldn't hesitate to ask them to work with a patient with blue problems and tell them, you know, this is going to be hard for you because you will think that these are trivial and childish problems, won't you?
You know, Doug, one response I've got, because this is not so much as an issue that I have wrestled with employees or anything like that, but just from a theoretical standpoint, how do you make a distinction between orange and yellow? You know, because in some levels, you know, yellow is just a little more sophisticated orange. I mean, it's like, so what's the difference? And I came up with these three simplistic measures, and it's somewhat comes out of the, if you just look at the theory in the book, these are three distinct things that set orange apart from, or yellow apart from orange. First one is don't harm others. You know, you can pursue your own goals, but if they move you into a place to where in order for you to achieve your goals, you have to harm others, don't do it. Orange does not do that.
Well, orange with no blue guide rails doesn't do that.
Well, okay, that's
yeah,
fine. But the fact
and with the wrong blue guide rails as well.
Right, but the fact that you have to add that, yellow doesn't add that. Yellow says, don't do it. Second one.
One is vice.
Second one is, what if you're going to do it, serve the whole stack, serve the other V memes, see the value in the other V memes. Don't just focus on yours. And the third one is maybe not quite so explicit in the theory, but it's totally is, don't get rigid. You know, yellow's all about flex flow. There's nothing rigid about yellow. Orange can get as rigid as, I mean, we're living in a calcified orange world. And so, you know, if you could get
I
them
like
into
that calcified orange.
you know, that could help.
Yeah,
you.
That's
the
like
arteries
toxic
are
blue.
gone.
Thank
One
you.
advice, Dogan, sorry, one advice like that works for me is, first of all, people need to understand by themselves, not just say to them, orange is unhealthy in this situation or stuff. But is to you, but from what I did when I had a similar challenge is by using the orange value of people trying to be successful and do some kind of competition games where the winner is the ones that have to find the limitation or the unhealthy orange. And then people try to think. And they come up with unhealthy orange examples, and then start to think.
And unintended consequences too, Saphir. You know, my mom used to say to me when I was, you know, a teenager developing orange, that's interesting. So what if everybody does that? And it would be like, oh, right.
Mm-hmm.
And so those kinds of questions, right? Of where does this go? I actually often teach contingency planning. Well, you know, this is a complicated world, and sometimes our best laid plans really don't pass the first engagement day. So how about a contingency plan? Or how about what's the worst possible outcome you could imagine from this?
Yes.
Because if they don't have good blue guide rails, they won't be very sensitive to the downsides of, and they'll be taking more risks than they think they are. So anything you can do to ask them to explicitly look at context, ask them to explicitly look at other issues, ask them to explicitly look at what the downside might be. All of those things broaden that orange awareness to the area of, oh gosh, we're moving out of the complicated into the complex or even the chaotic. Oh shoot. And that's where Healthy Orange has to get to before they can move on.
Thanks.
Dave?
I was thinking about all of this in Healthy Orange. I was thinking, like, from the perspective of a parent, having two adolescents, 22-year-old who's struggling to find a healthy orange and a 17-year-old who is very much finding a healthy orange. As a parent, the one with the healthy orange is like way less stress than the one who's struggling with it. So there's that. And I love the things in Barbara's slide. Also, I had kind of made some notes in advance, and you gave me some confirmation bias, Barbara, because you reinforced a few of my ideas. And one of the ideas I had jotted down for Healthy Orange is that ultimately objectivity leads to relativity. And the more we objectively look at the world, we find out that, wow, you know, context matters. That the laws, the blue laws that we're using to do our orange research ultimately shows us that the laws change in different situations. And we have to
And also we become aware of the observer effect, right?
Absolutely.
I see as I am, not as it is.
And so, yeah, I think like for healthy orange, ultimately, orange does need to have some humility that the closed Cartesian system that we use to do our orange research may give us an answer within that closed system, but still have to have the humility to realize there's a bigger, more complex system outside of that contained, controlled experiment. And yeah, somewhere that has to find a way for orange to be able to integrate beyond just the win-win two-partner transaction and see the system outside of that two-partner transaction and get to a win-win-win. And how can we have orange see not just the win-win, but the win-win-win?
Yes, that's a good one too, Doug, to think about. Okay, so you and I got a really good deal out of this. Wow, what happened to the patient? And always keeping that observation in front of you. You know, what happened to the community, right?
Yeah, these are really helpful. Thank you. Thank you all.
Any other thoughts, David?
Yeah, the only other notes I had jotting down was like how for orange to learn context and perspective. And I think one of the things that's so important as we're transitioning into what I perceived, at least in the context of the US, as like an end stage orange, to hold on to, you know, the free speech and civil liberties, because people are going to have to feel that they are safe and protected to be able to move forward. And also, in order to get the answers, we're going to have to be able to learn to listen to everybody, even the people we disagree with, even the people that are on the fringe. And as Barbara was talking today too, about truth, and you know, saying that there are better ideas or not good ideas. There are ideas that will have the system that will cause the system to fall apart, or a mutation that will cause the organism to die. But at the same time, I also think that as we look at different entities and we look at people and their idea and value clusters, it's even more complex than that. Like within a set of ideas or a cluster that someone comes to you, there are going to be things that they're seeing in there that are true, mixed in with things that are not. And how do we get each individual's perspectives to align into a healthy whole? And I guess that's where I'm at right now, is like trying to find the partial truth inside of even the most dark or toxic entity, and like, how can I pull the positive from that and help that be a positive contributor to the system, and have its dark side diminish.
So one way of thinking about that's been constructive for me is like thinking about like really like dark things like fascism. Understanding what's psychologically appealing about it. You know, like for example, like in my mind, like a part of like what makes fascism appealing is there's something in the human psychology that responds to being part of a heroic struggle. And, you know, maybe there can be like something positive like mine out of that, but you really need to understand like what, even like the darkest like things imaginable, like what's actually like appealing about that for like lived human beings. Because people don't like come into their beliefs arbitrarily. People, even horrible things, people tend to believe that for like a good reason that makes sense from like their perspective.
Well, and when life conditions present you with nothing but lemons, you know, sometimes the perspectives that you come to are pretty appalling.
Well, we're reaching the top of the hour, and I want to say this has been a wonderful discussion. I want to thank everybody for all that they've contributed, and especially Barbara for her very succinct, but very information-rich presentation that she gave. So we're going to sign off here, and I invite everybody back for next week. Thank you.